You are looking at a wonderful story. The story of how the earth was made. The Spanish word Colorado means full of color. This describes the Grand Canyon very well. It is not the river that is full of color. It is the canyon itself. Its walls are made of layers of stone, some red, some yellow, and some brown or orange. Each layer of stone lies on top of the other layers, like a great sandwich. And this is how the canyon was made, just like a sandwich. But this sandwich began nearly 2 billion years ago. At that time, the world was a very different place. No animals lived on the land, and there were only a few in the sea. The land was different, too. Where North America is now, there was a large piece of land called Laurentia. Then, some new islands, made of very hard stone, pushed up out of the sea. Slowly, during about the next 200 million years, they moved across the sea. In the end, they crashed into Laurentia and stayed there. They were the first layer, the bottom layer, of the sandwich. Now, we call them the Vishnu basement rocks. There are nearly 40 different layers of rocks in the walls of the Grand Canyon. We usually describe them in 3 groups of layers: the Vishnu basement rocks, the Grand Canyon supergroup rocks, and the layered Paleozoic rocks. Paleozoic means old life. The second group, the supergroup, was even slower than the first. It took them about 700 million years to arrive, and they could not stay still. They moved around and fell over, slowly, until the next group of rocks arrived. The final group is the top layer in the sandwich, the flat layers of red, yellow, and brown rock. They did not move around. They stayed flat, and that is why they make interesting pictures. Everyone who visits the Grand Canyon takes pictures of these layers. Most of this story happened under the sea. That is where many of the layers were made. And then, about 75 million years ago, something big happened. Something pushed the land up out of the sea. It made the Rocky Mountains, and it pushed the Grand Canyon 3 kilometers up out of the sea. Of course, it was not a canyon then. It was a piece of flat land, hard and dry, like the top of a table. But the land moved a little, and a river, the Colorado River, started to move across the land and to cut very slowly down into the rock. That was about 7 million years ago. Now, the Grand Canyon is 446 kilometers long and from 6 to 29 kilometers across. And when you look at it, you are looking at the long, slow story of the earth. Chapter 8. The Alhambra. The Alhambra sits on a hill above the town of Granada, in the south of Spain. Behind this large red building up on the hill, you can see snow on the mountain tops of the Sierra Nevada. From below, from the outside, it looks good. But when you leave behind the hot, noisy streets of Granada and go inside the Alhambra, it is even better. Inside the beautiful rooms and gardens of the Alhambra, it is cool, and the only noise is the quiet sound of water. The Alhambra was built by the last Muslim kings of Spain. The first Muslim armies crossed the sea from North Africa and arrived in Spain in AD 711. In less than 10 years, nearly all of Spain and some of France belonged to them. Only a small piece of the north of Spain, Asturias, was still Spanish. But the Spanish did not stop fighting. Slowly, they pushed the Muslim armies back to the south. After 500 years, only a small corner of the southeast of Spain was still in Muslim hands, and the story of the Alhambra began. In AD 1237, Muhammad ibn al-Ahmar, Sultan Muhammad I, made Granada his capital city. He decided to build the Alhambra on the hill above the town. He built a canal from the Douro River 8 kilometers away to bring water to the Alhambra. His new building was a fort, a place to defend. In fact, the name Alhambra means Red Fort. It was a good place to put a fort, because up there on the hill you can see a long way. If enemies are coming, you can see them a long time before they arrive. Muhammad ibn al-Ahmar lived here until his sudden death in 1273. But the kings who came after him changed the Alhambra. They changed it from a fort into a palace, a home for kings. And no kings lived in a more beautiful palace than the sultans of the Alhambra. At the center of the palace is the famous Court of Lions. This is an outside room full of sunlight and shadow. At the centre of the court, in the sunlight, is a fountain with stone lions around it. Long, narrow canals take water across the floor to and from the fountain. Around the sides of the court are more than 100 thin columns of stone. You can walk in the shadow of the columns and listen to the water that falls from the fountain. And you can think of the words that are on the fountain, words of the writer Ibn Zamrak. Water and white stone look the same, and we cannot know which of them is moving. The rooms and gardens of the Alhambra are places to sit and look and think. In the hall of the Abencerrajes, when you look up, you see a great white star with 8 arms. Light comes through the windows under the star. You think that the star is flying in the sky, not resting on the 4 walls of the room below it. The sultans of the Alhambra stayed in Granada for less than 200 years. They left in AD 1492. But their palace on the hill is still there, one of the greatest examples of Muslim building, one of the greatest treasures of Spain, and one of the wonders of the world. Chapter 9. The Lights of the Aurora. On the night of the 2nd of September, 1859, the dark sky over Europe and North America was suddenly full of light. The light did not come from the sun or the moon, and it had a strange colour. The light moved across the sky, coming and going like clouds in a strong wind. In the United States, a man in Boston was using the telegraph to speak to a man in Portland, 160 kilometers away. They both turned off the electricity for the telegraph, but they could still speak to each other for the next 2 hours. The electricity was coming from the light in the sky. How was this possible? And what was this light in the sky? The light is called the aurora. Usually, you can see it only at the very north of the Earth, where it is called the aurora borealis, or northern lights, or at the very south, where it is the aurora australis, or southern lights. But in 1859, something happened in the sun, a very large storm, and it moved the aurora across the middle of the Earth. We do not think that this ever happened before 1859, and we know that it has not happened since then. The light of the aurora does not come every night. It comes because of storms 150 million kilometers away in the sun. and the best times to see the light of the aurora are around the equinoxes, in March and September. Most often, the aurora is green, but it can be blue or red or any colour between. Sometimes the light is still, like the lights of a town far away. Sometimes the light moves, dancing in the sky. But why does the aurora happen? And why can we only see it at the top or bottom of the earth? The aurora is made by something called the solar wind, wind from the sun. We cannot see this wind or touch it. It is a wind of particles that travel away from the sun all the time, at about 400 kilometers a second. Most of the particles never touch the earth. The earth has a kind of wall around it that defends it against these particles. This wall is called the Earth's magnetic field, and it pushes the particles away on either side. It is like water going to each side of a large stone in a river. But the Earth's magnetic field has two windows in it: the magnetic north and the magnetic south. At these places, the Earth's magnetic field turns down into the earth, and some of the particles from the solar wind come through these magnetic windows. These solar particles crash into the particles that are already in our sky. And when this happens, we see the beautiful lines or clouds of light of the aurora. Where can you see the aurora? Alaska is a good place to see the aurora borealis, and you can also go to places like Iceland, Siberia, the north of Greenland, Norway, Sweden, and Scotland. To see the aurora australis, go to the south of Australia, Tasmania, or New Zealand. People travel thousands of kilometers to see the aurora, and they can never be sure that it will happen. But people who do see it say that they will never forget it. So, if you are ready to wait in the cold, and if you are lucky, perhaps you too will see the aurora when it dances across the sky. Chapter 10. Kyoto. The name Kyoto means capital city, and for more than 1,000 years, from 794 until 1868, Kyoto was the capital city of Japan. For many people, it is still the most important city in the country. But Kyoto is two cities, a new one and an old one, in one place. The new Kyoto is a busy, noisy, modern city, just like so many cities around the world. The old Kyoto is a quiet place, with its gardens and its temples made of wood. And the old city is still alive. In Kyoto, the old and the new live together, hand in hand. If you want to visit Saihoji, one of the old Buddhist temples, you must do more than just pay money. You must sit quietly for some time, then say or write Buddhist prayers before you can go in. This temple has a moss garden, which was made by the famous Japanese gardener Musō Soseki in 1339. The garden is cool, green, and beautiful. In old Kyoto, natural things are as important as things made by people. So the gardens are as important as the temples. If you want to see the temples at their best, then you have to see the gardens at their best. And the two best times to see the gardens are in the spring and in the autumn. In the spring, during April, the cherry trees come into flower. This is the best time to visit Kiyomizu-dera. This wooden temple was built on the side of a hill, and it was made without any nails. The front of the temple has tall wooden columns. You can stand here and look at the pink and white flowers of the hundreds of cherry trees. From here, you can see a lot of the city of Kyoto too. Kinkaku-ji, a beautiful gold temple, looks good at any time of year. In the spring, the cherry trees are in flower. In the autumn, the leaves on the trees change colour. They are now red, yellow, and green. And in the winter, everything is white when the snow falls. This temple was built by Shogun Yoshimitsu to be his home in 1397, but his son changed it into a temple. Fire has destroyed the temple 3 times. The last time in 1950. But each time the temple is built again, and the place is as beautiful as ever. The most famous garden in old Kyoto has got no flowers or trees at all. This dry garden, in the temple of Ryoanji, is made only of stones. But it is a very important place to Buddhists. The garden is 30 meters long and 10 meters across, and it has a little wall around it. In the garden, there are 15 large stones with moss around them in a bed of small white stones. Every day, the gardener of the temple makes lines in the small white stones, circles around the large stones, and lines between them. The large stones are in 5 groups. and it is only possible to see 14 stones at the same time. One stone is always hiding behind the others. It is possible to see the last stone, say the Buddhists, but only after you have sat still for a very long time. Chapter 11. The Great Barrier Reef. The largest living thing in the world. That is how many people describe the Great Barrier Reef. And they are right, because this living thing is more than 2,500 kilometers long, and it is alive. The reef is growing all the time because of very small sea animals called corals. Corals are unusual animals because they make the island that is their home. This island is not made of stone. It is made by the corals from calcium carbonate. Millions of corals together make an island under the water, which is called a coral reef. And the Great Barrier Reef is a long line of about 3,000 coral reefs and 900 islands near the northeast of Australia. It is home to thousands of kinds of fish and other sea animals. Coral reefs are good places to live. There are lots of holes, which are good places for fish to hide, and which are easy to defend. There are many dangerous fish around the reef, but there is lots of food too. There are not many coral reefs in our seas. Less than 1% of our seas have coral reefs in them. But our coral reefs are home to 25% of all things that live in the sea. And the important thing is this: coral reefs are beautiful places. Corals need seawater, but they also need sunlight. Because of this, corals do not usually live in deep, dark water. They prefer water that is less than 150 meters deep. So, the water around a coral reef is warm and full of light and life. Millions of visitors come to the Great Barrier Reef every year to see the beautiful reefs and sea animals. Some of the sea animals on the Great Barrier Reef are very rare. One of these is the sea cow, also called the dugong. Just like cows that live on the land, the sea cow eats grass, but it is a kind of sea grass that grows under the water. It is called a cow, but there is another land animal that is more like it. Just look at its nose. Yes, it is the elephant. There are 7 kinds of sea turtle in the world, and 6 of them live on the Great Barrier Reef. The turtle is one of our oldest animals. We know that the first turtles lived more than 200 million years ago. Turtles can live for as much as 80 years. They need to live for a long time. Some mother turtles do not begin to have their babies until they are 20 or even 30 years old. The Great Barrier Reef is one of the great natural wonders of the world. But, like other coral reefs, it is in danger. One of the dangers is natural. It is an animal called the crown of thorns starfish, which eats corals. Is this a big danger? 50 years ago, we thought it was. But today, we are not sure. Some years, there are more of these starfish. Some years, there are fewer. But there are also two dangers that come from people. First, the sea is getting dirtier. And second, it is getting warmer. Both of these things kill coral reefs. And both of these dangers are getting worse. Will people destroy the largest living thing in the world? Chapter 12. Xin's Last Army. In 1974, some workers were making a well in the ground near Xi'an in China. They were looking for water when they hit something hard in the ground. It was the head of a soldier. Not a real soldier, but a soldier made of terracotta. They took the soldier out of the ground. He was 2 meters tall, and he was beautifully made. And he was not alone. There were more soldiers under the ground, and horses, and weapons. The workers were looking for water, but they found an army. The army was made more than 2,000 years ago for a man called Ying Zhong, a man who changed the world. At that time, China was not one country, but 7 different countries. Ying Zhong's father was king of one of those countries. When he died, Ying Zhong was only 13, but he followed his father as king. And he started to make 2 armies. He made his first army to fight for him while he was alive. And he made his second army to fight for him when he was dead. He used his first army to fight against the other 6 countries of China. After 25 years, in 221 BC, he was an emperor, a king of many countries. He changed China from 7 countries into 1 country, the country that it still is today. And he changed his name. His new name was Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. But his second army was not ready yet. This army, the Terracotta Army, took more than 30 years to build. And he used 700,000 people to build it for him. They made more than 8,000 terracotta soldiers, each one with a different face, each one like a real person. And they gave each soldier real weapons to defend their emperor. They made horses for the soldiers to ride. They made people to play music for him, and dancers to dance for him, and birds to fly around his head. And when they were ready, the emperor put them all into the ground around his tomb. We know that this is true because we have found some of these things under the ground. Many of them are still under the ground. By 2010, nearly 1,900 of the soldiers were out of the ground. The rest are waiting for us to bring them out. We have found the soldiers who defend the tomb, but we have not opened the tomb itself. Not yet. There is an old story about the tomb. About 100 years after the death of the first emperor, in 210 BC, a man called Sima Qian wrote about the emperor and his tomb. He said that the tomb was as big as a city, with streets and houses, and an army to defend it. He said that the houses were made of gold and other kinds of treasure. For 2,000 years, no one thought that his words were true. But we have found the emperor's last army. What secrets are still waiting for us in his tomb? Chapter 13. Tomorrow's Wonders. Now you have read about 11 of the world's wonders, some from millions of years ago, and some from only a few hundred years ago. Of course, there are hundreds of others, and everyone has their favourites. 100 years from now, what will the favourites be? The Millau Bridge, more than 300 metres high, in the south of France. The Palm Islands of Dubai. The statues of Easter Island. The Channel Tunnel, which goes under the sea between England and France. The Three Gorges Dam in China. Or something newer still. Nobody knows. But we do know one thing. People will never stop making new and wonderful things.